Hi, and welcome to the belated sixth episode of the Dying Ways podcast with Dale Heim. I'm your host, Charles Featherston, and today we'll be talking about how different cultures approach death. And first, though, Dale, tell us why this session has been delayed. How have you been?
I have been doing many shamanic journeys, and anybody who does shamanic journeys knows that there is a lot of processing to be done. And this is what I have been doing. I've been processing, and I require a lot of downtime, me time to process. But I have an idea that is another whole podcast, I would imagine.
When you first walk into someone's home in South Africa, what are the things that immediately tell you how that family would approach death?
I think for myself, I look at the actual family and try to pick up their vibration as to how they are feeling about their loved one's death. And you will very quickly see there is one person who is in charge, and it might well be the patient, which I have seen in the past. But the family tend to want to take charge of what is going to happen with their loved one's funeral service, their wake, whatever it is that they're going to organize. And this is why I am so insistent upon a patient looking at the bigger picture of packing their suitcase. What is it they require of when they die? And if it is a family that is very religious, staunch religious Catholics, for example, they follow their religion, and there is no discussion upon that. And I go with the family. If they does not matter what their requirements are, I adhere to what their requirements are.
Do you often find that there's a tension between what the family wants and what the patient wants or needs?
Very often. Unfortunately, I would love to have said otherwise, but very often it is the person who is being left behind who feels that they have to control everything. And if there is no wish that from the one who is busy dying, if he has not written down or she has not written down what she requires on her deathbed, then there is complications, because what must the family do? They obviously must resort to what they know best. And what they know best is according to their religion, 99% of the time. So they will follow their religion. And this comes back to packing your suitcase.
So, do you find that the actual patient often has a change in the way they think about the value of the religion and religious ceremonies? Or do they tend to be in agreement with what their family want in those terms?
There is very often a situation where the actual person that is dying does not agree with the family, very often. And if I can give you an example, you will find a lot of Bantu people who are Christians. The Zionist church, for example, has got a huge following. And their beliefs are: you bury the body, you do not cremate the body, and there are several rituals that the church will tell you are not acceptable. For example, slaughtering a goat. For example, the body must be laid out in 3 days' time. So yes, there are always these situations where the one who is busy dying and the family do not always agree on something. Very often.
Okay. And so you've also worked often with people in England and Australia. Do you find that the situation is the same for them? Because they're much more likely to be atheist cultures.
I don't know too much about the English. I think they are, their culture, I'm sure, has changed over time, and I have not worked in a hospital in England. But my best friend, colleague who trained with me in Australia, she has been a nursing sister and has only just recently retired. So I do know what their procedures are. And according to Bozzy, we have the same procedures in hospitals in Australia as we have in South Africa. That I can tell you categorically. Now, one of the most interesting procedures that nurses have to know is how to deal with a corpse from a Jewish family.
Yeah.
The corpse is obviously Jewish. And there is a ritual that we would do when we were student nurses. And in the good old days, I'm talking about the 70s, we would automatically, a Jewish person died, we would call somebody that we referred to as the Wachter. But this is just a direct South African translation of what the Jewish person is called. He's called a watcher or a shomer, Shomer. And he is the person who comes in and watches over that body from the time it dies until the time it goes into its burial grave, be that in a grave or into the crematorium. And this is because they respect the dead. So we are not allowed to touch the body of the Jewish people, and we are only allowed to put the body in a position of the prone position, and we must cover the face. Now, covering the face is possibly the most interesting part of somebody dying. It comes from folklore and superstition. You cover the face because you don't want any bad spirits to invade that body. So the person must not be able to see in the room. And if you wheel the body out of the room, it must go feet first, because then the body cannot look back and it cannot catch the eye of anybody that's living and beckon them over onto the other side along with them. So this is all tradition. And the other rules that we have with regards to people that die in a hospital are we wash, we cleanse, we make sure that the body is clean before it goes down to the mortuary. And that is the mortuary within the hospital. But from that mortuary, many of our patients go to government mortuaries. May I talk about a government mortuary?
Sure.
Now, a government mortuary, I had the miserable task of being in a government mortuary it was part of a job description that I had. And I would go, the first time I went to this government mortuary was in Johannesburg, in Pretoria. And I was appalled at the state of the government mortuary. To begin with, the smell was overpowering. Everybody dead corpse is put onto a white slab where they have got to do the post-mortem, and everything around is tiled so that you can wash the blood away. But now the body, when it has been cut up and examined, it's left on the floor for the next body to come. Then somebody takes that body, goes and puts it back into one of the fridges. And I found the handling of corpses very disrespectful, but I don't think the average person knows what goes on in a mortuary. I really do not.
No, that makes sense. And there's something interesting there also in the sense of needing a witness for that final part of the journey, because I think often your role is actually just to witness someone's passing.
Yes. Just to witness it and nothing more. You don't really involve yourself anymore because it's got nothing to do with you. So yes, we are often just witnesses.
Yeah, which is something that is very valuable. It's something that turns up a lot in psychological and therapeutic practice, the need for people to be witnessed in order to process their own feelings about things and to feel their own reality in the world around them.
That is a very, very, very loaded question, because it is terribly important for somebody who has lost a loved one to see them as a corpse, to go and acknowledge the corpse. Now, we have a tradition here for the colored people. Within 3 days, they want the body buried. They are Christians, but they want the body buried in 3 days, because they want the undertaker to hurry up and clean the body up and bring it back to the home of that person for all the relatives and all the friends to come and view the body. So they don't want a body that is that smells bad. This is how they think, because it won't smell bad even if it's been in a fridge for a week. But the 3 days comes from, quickly, Mr. Undertaker, clean this body, set it up, bring it back to my house in the coffin, and then they allow everybody to come in, view, and give their story about that person. So it is really, it's the send off. And this is the colored community. This is how they send off their people.
Yeah, because I was raised Hindu, and for us, when someone died, they would lie in state in the house for a week or so that the same kind of thing could happen, and everybody could come through, see the body, tell their stories. I mean, there was a lot of religious paraphernalia and prayers and things that went around it. But I do think there's something valuable there that gives people a space to genuinely say goodbye, rather than just the person disappearing and then the next you see of them being in the coffin on the way into the grave or the cremation.
Yes, and a very pertinent story to this is a relative of mine. Her husband, who was my cousin, was in a motor car accident and he died, and she did not feel she had the jelly beans to go and identify his body. And as I was the next close family member, she asked me to identify the body. So I went along and identified the body and said to her, yes, this is your husband that's passed on. And we had the funeral. He was buried, and the funeral, I don't remember what we did. But for years after that, the wife, my cousin's wife, did not believe that I had identified her husband correctly. She believed that her husband had left her and gone off with another woman. And this was something that she battled with for many, many, many years. Now, I do not know what the ritual is or what we should be doing with a child. I've got no idea, because I do not work with children. But I know from an adult point of view, I think it is very important to say goodbye to that person and see them physically, see the corpse physically. That's my belief.
Well, that makes sense. So to move on to some of the stories from the book, Hester was very conservative and religious. I am Christian. And her family used that faith as a reason to deny her pain relief. Now, and you've also spoken recently about your Afrikaans farmer who you've been introducing cannabis to. Do you find that the stoicism and rigor of that kind of life and community make it harder for patients to admit their suffering or to do anything about their pain?
Definitely. If you grow up particularly an Afrikaans family, and I had an Afrikaans father until I was 9 years old, you do as he says, when he says it, and how he says it. And you follow the Christian the Bible, to the last word. The Bible is read on a Sunday evening and you follow it to the last word. So whatever it says in the Bible, you follow. And I think there is a lot of, in the Afrikaans belief, this is just my belief, there is a lot of, as far as the Afrikaans person is concerned, I do believe that they have set rules, and it is for the family to follow the rules, especially if the head of the family is a staunch Inheerkerk Afrikaner. And as far as the cannabis is concerned, that's a good question, because an Afrikaans person will take any drug that a doctor gives them. But because of the stigma attached to cannabis, they are not inclined to want to take cannabis because it gives them a feeling of euphoria. And that feeling of euphoria, we are taught as Afrikaners many, many, many times that this is not acceptable. Why? It's just the Afrikaans tradition. And yes, having grown up in an Afrikaans family, I can vouch for that.
Yeah, and I think it does link in both with a strand of Christianity and a strand of living a life for centuries on a frontier, where suffering is taken to have a value of its own. And therefore, things that you do to do with pleasure or to do with reducing suffering must therefore be sinful.
Yes, yes. Your eloquence is amazing. And that's exactly what I was trying to say. Yes, I agree.
Okay. And so you mentioned earlier that Bantu cultures do things differently. So can you just talk us through the standard process for somebody that's died in a township community or in a Bantu community?
I do not think the average person in the whole wide world realizes how interesting our Bantu population really are. To go back into their history, I have not gone into the history of the Khoisan because I grew up with Zulu people. The first person that looked after me was my Zulu nanny, Lizzie, I absolutely adored. My best friend in theatre was a Zulu girl. And the first language I learned was Zulu, and the first culture I learned was Zulu. So when I speak mainly about the Bantu people, I am very familiar with the Zulu people, and their folklore and their superstitions are unbelievably real. Today they are real. Yes, you will get the person possibly who is been a Christian all his life. His mother's brought him up as a Christian, and he is a black person. He's a Bantu. He does not believe in the folklore. But the interesting thing is, the Zulu people will follow Christianity, and then they will have a death. Now, for them, a death is a pollution. They see it as a pollution. They want to remove the spirit as quickly as possible because they don't want to pollute their environment. Having said that, the Zulu people will follow the Christian belief on an everyday basis. But when it comes to burying their dead, they will tell you, no, we go back to what we believe in. We go back to, you can call it folklore, you can call it superstition, but we go back to burying our dead as we have for centuries. And I respect that. One of the beautiful compounds that they use is called Zumbani. Zumbani, it's also known as the fever tree, but there is no attachment to the fever tree as such. It's just used, it's got medicinal properties. But the Zumbani plant smells of lemon. So in the days of early burials, the corpse would begin to smell. So they would stuff the nostrils and stuff everything with Zumbani, and so that the corpse did not smell too bad. Now, the interesting thing about Zumbani, if I might add, it has the same cannabinoids as cannabis. That's just by the by. Then what the Zulus believe in is when they bury their dead, they celebrate for many days. The length of that period is up to the individual. But at the service of the funeral, where they do not believe in cremation, they do not believe in cremation. They do not believe in disrespecting the corpse because they say this is bad. We would call it karma. but they say they have to respect the corpse. They have to look after it. I'll give you the reason in a minute. At the burial, they always slaughter a goat and sometimes an ox. And the goat it's a removal of the spiritual pollution of the corpse. So that is why they roast a goat. Yes, it's to feed the party, but they also take the chime, which is the contents of the stomach, and they either wash with this or they eat it, because this also removes the spiritual pollution of that dead person. It's a when you say to a Bantu, "Oh, my mother died," they immediately say, "I am so sorry," and they give you their blessing because they believe it is a bad thing to have somebody die. It goes back so far that the Zulu chief, if he died, he was so revered. I think they probably slaughtered a couple of goats, but on his grave, the buffalo thorn. Now we know this is the Wachabiki worm. The Xhosas and the Zulus and the Ndebele, they call it umfafa. Now this is a thorn, and every South African knows this thorn. It is two horns which move in opposite directions, and it's showing the way that the spirit is going, and it's showing where the spirit has come from. And that is the tree that the Zulu chief has planted on his grave. Now, these customs are still carried out. If you had to go to in KZN, you would still find these in Transkei. You would still find these rituals today. They still believe in these rituals. So the Zulus have got an incredible culture. I don't know much about the Xhosa or the Ndebele, but I do know about the Zulu cultures. And also, they bury within 3 days, but they have a ritual of respecting that person, and they call it we call it a party. For 2 months afterwards, they can celebrate that person because they believe that that person is going to the afterlife to be in the afterlife to actually look after them. So they have to look after the spirit of the one who has died. You will always see the Zulu will say to you, we must respect our dead because our dead are there in the spirit world to look after us. And that is why that lady I told you about had to have a tombstone. It was the most. You talk about people in the townships who cannot afford these things. They will find the money. They will find the money to do it. She needed 800 Rand for a tombstone because she said, "This is what I have to do for my husband's spirit, because he will look after me in the afterlife. And if he doesn't, he will send somebody that is bad." And they believe in that folklore and that superstition. So yes, she was prepared to pay that 800 Rand for that tombstone. And she said, furthermore, the cars and the trucks, they cannot ride over his grave. It is a sacred place for us. So we are running out of space, aren't we? We don't have anywhere to bury people anymore.
Yes, and that's something that often happens as cultures become denser and have more people in them. Because certainly I know that something that's changed a lot with those traditional funeral rituals is that historically you would feed anybody that turned up to the funeral, and it would be the gathering of the village and the nearby villages. But in the modern era, it's become a huge problem because the expectation that you feed anybody that comes by doesn't work when you live in a city or a place with a lot of people in it that you don't actually know personally.
Exactly.
Okay, so with rituals like slaughtering, do you find that that ever creates a problem within the hospice or frail care home environment? Or is it
No,
something people will
no.
only ever do in their ancestral village?
It does not create a problem, because you must remember nowadays we are the Rainbow Nation. So we work with a lot of multicolored people in our hospitals, in our old age homes, and it's an accepted thing. If you grow up in South Africa, you know what the African culture is. They respect your culture. We respect their culture. No, if they want to slaughter a sheep, then they slaughter a sheep. But something that we should talk about is, what are the responsibilities of a midwife who has a baby that is stillborn? Because a baby that is stillborn, the mother needs to say goodbye to that stillborn baby, because under 12 weeks, they are not allowed to have a funeral. They're incinerated. So now the mother has aborted. We've aborted that baby because it's stillborn. But we just merrily go and we burn everything. But the mother needs to mourn the baby. So you've got a lot of people that will ask for the cord, the umbilical cord, and the placenta, because they take that and they bury it very close to their home so that they can still take care of that spirit. They will not allow it to just go. Very, very often they will say that we don't want you to burn this. And this is something that we need to, as nurses, respect, because it is their tradition.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that. So, on the note of those cultural practices, the funeral industry in this country can be quite predatory. Can you tell us a little bit about that and about the impact on families?
It's not a case of can be predatory. They are predatory, because when you go to a funeral, and I've had to bury somebody in the last 3 months, and you say, I want the cheapest funeral out, they think you are being disrespectful. But I am cremating that person, so I ask for a tomato box, which is the cheapest. No, ma'am, we don't have a tomato box. We do this, 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 and this. And in South Africa, the minimum quote is 15,000 to bury somebody, but they push it up to 20,000 when your eyes are, when you've blinked your eye. So 20,000 for a person who is not earning that could be a salary for somebody, and that is what they've got to take to bury their loved ones. So it is a complete and utter ripoff most of the time. And what are they doing? They are preparing the body. They're putting it into a coffin. Yes, they're transporting the body, but this many times they charge the person for the doctor coming to examine the body and give a death certificate. But if a patient dies in a hospital, he cannot leave the hospital without a death certificate. So that already is a price that you don't need to include in from the undertaker.
So it's interesting. I came across a while back the fact that in the very first legal code that was put together in ancient Rome, one of the 12 laws that they included was limiting the cost of funerals and of funeral practices, specifically because this kind of thing was causing such an issue in their early culture and early civilization.
It should have been brought into our culture, because there are more funeral homes in South Africa than there are graveyards. We don't have anywhere to put these people. And this is something interesting. When you have got a person who has died in hospital, and the nursing sister will say to you, right, you are the family member, who are the undertakers? Be very, very sure that you have chosen a funeral parlor that has its own fridges on its premises, so it doesn't take the body to the general mortuary. Where does the body go to? You need to know where the body is going, even if it is just somebody that you're organizing the funeral for. The respect of that corpse is very important. So know where the body is going to be sitting, know where the body is going to be taken care of, And the first thing I did when my mother-in-law passed away was I phoned the funeral parlor and I said, do you have all the necessary facilities on your premises? In other words, do you have the fridges? They said yes. I said, right, then you can start giving me a quote, because I'm not having her riding around to every place just because you don't have fridges. And many of these parlors do not have their own fridges. They don't. They'll pick up the body and they'll dump it somewhere else until it's ready. So the body goes up and down.
Huh.
That's
And that
something that
definitely
no
makes
one even
sense.
thinks about.
Because something that I notice in township communities and township adjacent communities here is that there are literally more funeral homes than there are grocery shops, for example.
Yes, yes, yes. And there again, you'll see the funeral home is this little, little trailer where they are going to say, okay, now don't worry about this. We're going to organize the funeral. Go into it in depth. Where is the body going to? Know where the body is going to. In other words, if you or your sister or your brother want to go and view that body because they weren't present when the person died, where are they going to? Where must they go to view this body? I will tell you that a provincial mortuary is not a place most people want to go near. We
Hmm.
really don't want to go near a place like that.
Oh, that makes sense. Just to add a little information here, just checked, and so the law of the 12 tables was 450 BC and limited the number of mourners, prohibited excessive mourning, restricted what goods you could bury with the dead, and banned having multiple fires for cremation, primarily because the competitive and lavish funerals that they were having were actually a drain on family wealth and ended up causing more problems in communities because of the depletion of capital. Because I've had it myself where I've had a friend whose mother has died and who has been as poor as anyone could be, but then suddenly had to find the money for buying a goat or a sheep because it was just unacceptable to anyone around him that he did not pay for this whole event that would take him literally several months to get the money together for from his normal income.
Mm, mm. Do you know that there is so much, as I've said, superstition and folklore attached to death, that one of the things that not necessarily Bantu people, but many people believe that if they do not do the right thing, in other words, what is expected of them, and spend a lot of money with that funeral, something is going to come back to haunt them. And you've mentioned the tokolosh before,
Mhm.
because there are many, many Bantu people who are petrified of the tokolosh. But do you know the tokolosh has got nothing to do with the dying? Nothing, nothing, nothing to do with the dying. It's got to do with black superstition. And I say black
Mhm.
superstition because most of these sangomas are
Mhm.
black people, although I think we do Bantu people, although we do get the whites now who are
Yeah, there's a few
sangomas.
around.
And what you do for a tokolosh, he is an evil little boy, evil little man. He's
Mhm.
very, very, very tiny. And he goes around causing absolute havoc. So somebody would pay the tokolosh I beg your pardon, somebody would pay the Sangoma money and to put a tokolosh onto this person because they don't like this person for whatever. And the tokolosh will go along and he will cause havoc in that person's life. This is why many of our Bantu people, the lady who looked after me, Lizzie, the Zulu lady,
Mm.
had her bed on two bricks so that the tokolosh could not manage to get up onto her bed. They were petrified of the tokolosh. But no, the tokolosh does not have anything to do with deceased people.
So you've spoken a bunch about the different cultural modes here. If you could take one of the practices from the Bantu death cultures and blend it into the normal Christian or atheist practices, which one would it be?
I think what I would take from their culture is their belief in the afterlife, their belief in the spirit world, their belief in their ancestors. And when they talk about their ancestors so openly, they talk about the afterlife so openly, and they say that they know that their loved one is going to be looked after by the people who have passed before them. And this is something that many, many, many people do not talk about. They don't talk about the afterlife. They don't believe in the afterlife. They don't believe that they're going to a good place, be they Christian, be they whatever religion they are. And that is something that it makes the journey so much easier, especially for us who know so much about the Hindu way of life. We know that our loved one is being taken care of, and we know that we're going to be joining them one day. And
And I
that is the
suppose
part that I think should be brought into everybody's belief.
that makes sense. And especially because that sense of the ancestors being very directly present is very strong, compared to the more general belief in because so within Hindu belief, there is an afterlife, but the moment you move into it, you lose everything that was you personally. So it's only a very
Yes.
general relationship with the deceased. Whereas in the Bantu
Hmm.
cultures, they stay themselves in a very strong way and stay very concerned for your existence and matters with their own family and community. But on the
This
note,
is exactly.
so on the note of the
And
different communities, you've spoken a bunch about the Bantu communities and about the more rigorous Christian Afrikaans communities. Within South Africa, there is a very large coloured community which started as a mix of those two and has evolved into a very distinct community of its own. How would you say the coloured community is different to both the white Afrikaans and the black Bantu approaches?
they are different, surprisingly. Even though they classify themselves as Christians, they don't believe in folklore. They do not believe in superstition, but they do believe in their ancestors. They do believe in we must look after the deceased, because we need to make sure his journey is a very soft, sacred, holy journey to the other side. And this is why they have the coffin in the house for 3 days, an open viewing, so that the loved ones who come to the coffin to say, or the friends, to say their goodbyes, they are there to talk good about the deceased. They are there to make sure that every good memory of this person is remembered. And it's not very different to what we do, but they don't believe in the ashes. They will not take the ashes. They will cremate, but they will not take the ashes into their home. And this is something that, speaking to colored communities, they
Hmm.
say that the funeral home will not dispose of the ashes. It is your responsibility. So whether you like it or not, it's your responsibility. And this is the one thing they cannot understand, because they don't believe that this is part of the person who has just died.
Oh, so then what do they end up doing with the ashes?
They have no choice but to take it from the undertakers,
Mm.
because the funeral home sends it to them. They will courier to you. And the first thing they will do is dispose of it in soil, as if they were burying it. They've got no choice. There's no ritual like, I'm going to bury it here and then put a beautiful tree on it. No, we just get rid of the ashes as soon as possible, because as far as we are concerned, the moment the funeral parlor came to collect the coffin, we said goodbye to that person. We never see them again. And that is all we need. So I think their cutoff point is very, very, very definite. And then they will talk to their dead, They will talk to them as if they are still alive. And I find that they're very practical about speaking to people in the afterlife, very practical, but they do believe in the afterlife.
Two final questions. First, between these three cultures, is there a lot of difference in what counts as a good death?
Do you know that the Bantu do not talk about death? They don't want to invite that pollution into their home, so they will not talk about death. They will answer a few questions, but for them to sit down and if I say to this guy, how do you want your mother to die? And he will say, this is not something that we talk about. This is not something that we look at. She will die however she's going to die. But if I do have a patient who has been given, as I've always said, a green light by their doctor, and they have now called me in to help them, the priority there is I do not want pain, and I would like to die in the comfort of my own home with the people I choose to have around me, but I need my animals around me. And that is not something that the Bantu people have ever verbalized. I will say that I have not had many Bantu patients, so perhaps this is something with the cultures that have changed over the years, but I have not experienced it.
And that's a good lead into my final question, which is, have you noticed that there have been changes in the way dying is treated over the course of your career in any of these individual cultures?
Yes and no, because if you have a staunch Bantu person who believes in what he wants, he will follow, as I've said, the Christian belief, but at the last minute, he is going to bury his dead the way he has been brought up. And for me, I have been brought up in a certain way, and I might have thought about different ways to bury someone, but at the end of the day, I'm going to go with what I have been brought up with. I don't think it is an easy thing to change people's way of thinking about how they are going to treat their dead, especially because of superstition. And our population, white and black, but mainly the Bantus, are very, very, very superstitious. So yes, they will go with our Christian belief, but at the end of the day, they still believe they want to do what they want to do. And the Jewish procedures have never changed. They have never changed. We do talk about Orthodox Jews. They have never changed. And that I find so interesting. Still today.
Something that a lot of people don't know is that the first set of Jewish settlers here came here secretly because both the British and Dutch insisted that the settlers they sent here had to be Christian. So the first few Jewish communities here were people that had lied about their faith to get onto boats, and it took them years to start having their ritual meetings and practices the way that they were meant to, because there were so few of them and they were so broadly distributed around the country, and because a lot of them actually anglicized and converted to Christianity for the sake of fitting into their local communities.
You've used a very interesting term there. They resorted to being Christians to fit in. And sometimes I think this is also with our Bantu community. They very much look. If you look at a beautiful Bantu woman, and she has to have blonde, long hair. No, please, you are so exquisite with your black hair. You are so exquisite with your afros, with your dreadlocks. And us, and I call myself a white person, I don't look nearly as beautiful as you. So there is this element where we are going to look a little bit like you and perhaps take on your Christianity. But they take it on, many take it on superficially, because when it comes to the nitty-gritty and the death, or even a wedding, look at a wedding. If you are a Bantu person, you go straight back to the way you were married in the good old days. That's just another subject. But yes,
Hmm.
I do believe that there is Christianity taken on board to impress or to fit in, rather fit in, not impress, but fit in.
Okay, well, thank you, Dale. That has been a fascinating set for today. You can find Dying Ways online in book, ebook, and audio forms. Join us next week when we'll be talking more about shamanic and reincarnation cultures and personal beliefs in the process of dying.